Good day, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of XBRL Direction webinars. My name is Catalina Ibanez. I am the chair of the Implementation Awareness Task Force Working Group of XBRL International. I am an XBRL consultant and XBRL expert at Lucanet Amana. The topic of our webinar from today is how to use a single inline XBRL documents for multiple reports. Today, we have with us a high-level speaker, Dr. Ben Russell, co-chair of the Taxonomy Design Working Group of XBRL International and a Strategic Market and Innovation Director at Core Filing. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us today. If you have any questions, please use the FAQ option, and at the end of the webinar, we will have time for answer them. So, Ben, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Catalina. So, hello, my name is Ben Russell. As Catalina says, I'm co-chair of the Taxonomy Design Working Group. And today, it's my pleasure to present a piece of draft guidance that covers the increasingly common use case of using multiple taxonomies in a single report. At the time of this webinar, the guidance is a review draft. And what this means is that we're seeking comments from the community really just to ensure that it's the best guidance that it can be. But it's published for you to go and read, and we'll give you an email to use if you have some comments afterwards. So today we're going to go over the main points in the guidance, but I do highly recommend looking at the full guidance if you want to see in more detail or spend a bit more time on particular areas. But if you have any questions immediately, enter them into the FAQ section, and we can look at those after the presentation. So what are we covering today? Well, quite a simple agenda today. We're just going to look at what challenge this guidance is seeking to address, what XBRL offers in the way of options to meet the challenge, and also look at the differences between them. And then finally, I'll present the main recommendations of the guidance. So we'll start with the challenge. The challenge here that we're looking at is that as more topics become digitized, and business reports become more varied in content, having a separate report for every topic to every data collector could become overwhelming. And we're seeing a lot more digital reporting. This could really happen. So to reduce this filer burden and basically just simplify the reporting, people want to make multi-use reports and things that can be used for multiple data collections. And this includes submitting the same report, perhaps to different data collectors, and also cover different reporting requirements or different pieces of legislation within a single report. And what this means is that a single report might include content on different topics, which come from different taxonomies. And they may also be subject to different filing rules for different data collectors. So the challenge we have in front of us, we really want to achieve the top 2 points here, while handling the bottom 2. That's the challenge. So fortunately, the XBRL specification actually has good support for this use case. And in writing the guidance, we identified 4 options that are worth considering that I'll just go through today. So the first one is, you can think of this as the default option or the do nothing option. And in this, data preparers create completely separate reports, every taxonomy that they need to report against. And we've got this diagram here. If you look at this diagram, we can see a set of taxonomies across the top. These are all the things that we want reported. And these orange arrows indicate that there's a possibility for a filer extension or an entity-specific extension to be added at this point. They can add their own data points. And we then have this middle row, which is the iXBRL reports. These have been created by a preparer, and they'll be submitted to a data collector. Then we have these blue arrows, and these indicate the first step in processing these reports, which is the extraction of computer-readable data. And in the world of iXBRL, this means converting iXBRL into plain XBRL, which is just the data computer readable aspects. So we've included all these bits of detail about the taxonomies, the XBRL report, and the data, and where extensions can go, and the extraction, to highlight the differences between options. But even looking at the shape of this, hopefully it's clear to see that if you have two topics covered by two taxonomies, then if you take this approach, you create two reports, and you end up with two sets of data at the bottom here. And then if you have three, there's three taxonomies, three reports, three pieces of data, and so on. Now, although this looks, why would you do that? Well, actually, this is an extremely normal situation. And so if you've ever had to consider reports across, say, multiple jurisdictions, then you've quite likely come across this, where each of these verticals is a different jurisdiction. However, this is also a situation we'd quite like to improve or provide an alternative where possible. So that takes us on to one of our options. So this one is called multiple taxonomy references. And in this, we have the same taxonomies, the same reporting topics across the top. And again, each can be extended separately. And then they are brought together at the report level. And this XBRL report is a single report that contains tagged data from any or all of the taxonomies above. And then once this is processed, the data we get out is a single set of data that contains exactly the same scope as the XBRL report, everything from every taxonomy. So we call this multiple taxonomy references. It's to do with the underlying mechanism. Our next option is quite an interesting one, and it's called multiple target documents. And with multiple target documents, we, again, have the same taxonomies at the top, same opportunity to extend each one to create a single XBRL report. However, in this case, every fact in this report has a small piece of additional information, and this ties that fact, each individual fact, to a target document. And what this means is when the XBRL is processed to get the data, it produces multiple data, one for each of these target documents. So this is what makes it different to the one before. Now, you may wonder why there's so many XBRL reports shown down here. And this is because the target documents don't actually need to match the taxonomies one-to-one. And you can have any number of target documents for any number of taxonomies. It's quite a flexible approach if this is the structure you're looking for. And the final, and perhaps the most important option we'll talk about today, is referred to as the unifying extension. And this is the last of these diagrams I'll ask you to try and understand. But in this one, we still have our set of taxonomies at the top, but now we have a new colored arrow. We have these gray arrows, and these are going to characterize this approach. And these arrows indicate that the data collector is going to draw in all of these taxonomies themselves to create a single unified taxonomy that includes all of them. And perhaps when they do this, they might handle some discrepancies or data overlaps or other things along the way. And then this unifying extension is then published, which gives the opportunity for extensions if they're needed. And we create a single XBRL report, which in turn creates a single piece of XBRL data. And in this case, we end up with arguably the simplest case, that despite these being backed by a number of taxonomies, actually there's, with the XBRL report and the data, it's actually just one taxonomy. You know exactly what's going to be in it. Okay, so these are our options. And I've highlighted some of the specific features of each, but let's just look at a summary of the differences between them. So the main differences are on the screen. and two of these, the top two, where the extension taxonomies are allowed or how many might be required. And the second one, how many separate XBRL reports or chunks of data you're going to get after the conversion from inline. These are two quite mechanical differences. So we were able to look at those in the previous diagrams. The third one is a bit more interesting, I guess. There's more detail on this in the guidance, but I did want to have a look a little bit closer around this overlapping content. So I've just got a small sample here. And in this imaginary example, we have two taxonomies that we want to draw from. We want content from both of these taxonomies. And they both define data that basically fulfills the same reporting need. I've put in here greenhouse gas emissions. It could be just something more basic like turnover or revenue or something like that. So we actually need to handle this overlap somehow. Either of these could be used to meet the requirement to disclose. Okay. So we could tell people that they only need to tag one of these, and then we would put that information in a filing manual or something like that, some other similar guidance, and tell them to only tag one, and that would handle this overlap. Or we could ask them to tag both, and again, with some instructions provided to the data preparers, they would know whether to tag the same number with both, or perhaps if these are slightly different definitions, there might be different numbers that need to be tagged. But basically, we get data for both of these. Or alternatively, we could resolve this with an extension. And this is dealing with this overlap before it even gets to data preparers and before it gets to data consumers with one of these unifying extensions. So this overlapping problem is really a good example of the final difference on this slide, which is who handles the complexity of bringing all these taxonomies together into one report. Now, there is some necessary complexity here. It's not all going to go away. It's not a simple thing to do necessarily. But the complexity can be moved between different parties. So in here, in the guidance, we consider moving that complexity from producer to collector and consumer. Where do we want that complexity to sit? So these are our four. So we've had four options, four differences between them, and the guidance covers all of what we've seen so far in a little bit more detail if you want to see more. But it also includes this summary chart here, which is used to compare each of the approach. I'm not going to go through every single box, but there were a few I wanted to highlight, really to explain the thinking behind the recommendation, which we'll come on to next. So the first one I wanted to highlight is this item here. And this is how many extension points are available for data preparers. Now, we think that the situation where you might be providing multiple extensions for multiple taxonomies is not a good situation. It's quite a complex situation. And so we think that the unified taxonomy extension is superior because it simplifies this and requires only one extension point, no matter which of the underlying taxonomies or topics you need to provide your entity-specific information for. And the second is the case we saw before, where we're looking at handling of overlapping content, and the unified extension here is unique in that you can actually handle this without putting documentation or adding filing rules. So it's dealt with entirely at the data definition level. And then finally, this overlapping content issue and any other complexities of having these taxonomies sitting together can be taken on at the first opportunity by the data collector. So given all the analysis we did in this table and discussions about it, we moved on to providing a recommendation. And it probably doesn't surprise you at this point that our recommendation is if a single report should contain content covering multiple taxonomies, then it is recommended to create a unifying extension. And the guidance suggests or recommends that this is the best way to reduce the filer burden and create the most ambiguous and useful data you can. However, of course, with all our guidance, there might be practical considerations or totally unique situations that simply prevent the recommended approach. And but we feel these are the only reasons why you would not be following this recommendation. Okay, so that was all I wanted to cover today. And to finish off, I've said this a couple of times, but I'll say it again. I highly recommend reading the full guidance. It goes through all this. It's interesting to see how apparently simple problems can be quite complex, but also nice to have a lot of people having already done all that thinking and laying it out for you. And I also invite you to send any feedback or comments to the address on the screen, the tdwg@xbrl.org, and we'll be reviewing it very soon with the comments received. So that's it for me. Thank you. Are there any questions, Catalina?
Ben, thank you very much for the presentation and the explanation of the guidance. The Implementation Awareness Task Force prepared some questions for you, just a few of them. And then we will have a look on we have right now 2 questions from the audience. So the first question from us will be, what is the scope of the guidance? Is for who is this guidance?
Yes, thank you, Catalina. So, I mean, there are loads of areas where we think there'd be more guidance useful, but this one rose to the top really because of sustainability reporting and how important that's got. So what we're seeing is that authorities that were collecting financial business data, like IFRS data or their own GAAP data, need to expand their data collection to collect sustainability information, but they want to use the same infrastructure. And this is why this is turn up. And this bringing of sustainability information into these reporting or data collections is a really good example of who would benefit from the guidance and save time really by having an answer to quite a complex problem. So in terms of scope, this has also informed the technical scope. So particularly in this, we're only talking about XBRL documents. There might be a different answer to XBRL documents because some of the techniques spoken about here are XBRL specific. And then the final part of scope, I guess, kind of audience. And we're usually writing guidance for taxonomy authors, but as it's been out for a few weeks and we've seen interest in this from various other people, and I've been involved in discussions myself around this. So it is really quite useful to see why things are done in a particular way, even if you're not the one who makes the decision about how they're going to be done. We all have our kind of part to play in it.
Thank you, Ben. What will be the best option for reporter preparers? And will be also another option best for regulator bodies? Is there any difference of who is reading the guidance?
Yeah. So if we look at either kind of preparers or data collectors separately, and just considered, well, what is the easiest thing for this one particular group or even individual, then we might have come up with a different answer. But we thought that it was best, really, we come from the point of view that what's best for any of the individual participants is generally what is the best thing overall. So we're not looking for the easiest for one particular party. We're looking for the best, what delivers the best filing program. And the way this guidance panned out, the recommendation is for basically the data collector to take on the complexity of multiple topics, take on the complexity of taxonomies, and do that on everyone else's behalf. So arguably, they're not making their life easier by going down this route, but they're definitely providing the simplest interaction for every other participant. And what they will benefit from is a better filing program at the end of it. That's the idea. Now, if there was only a data collector and or the longevity of the filing program wasn't important, and various things like that, then maybe you might take a different route. But given that we work within ecosystems in data collection, that's the way it is, and this is what we recommend for everyone.
And what alternative approach is suggested when the unification option is not possible due to, for example, legislative or technical restrictions?
Yeah, so we do kind of outline what kinds of environments allow this to happen, allow this unified extension approach to happen, and we do expect that to be the normal environment. So the ability to talk to the people who are writing the taxonomies you want to use, that's important, but we consider that to be normal. However, there might be things that block the approach, and we don't expect these to be kind of technical as such. But the more blocking ones will be kind of governance or legal or even political. These are the ones that are much, much more difficult to get over. And in that case, there are the other options. The other three options are all viable. Multiple target documents, multiple taxonomy references are viable and have been used, so they do work. So if you're really unable to follow the guidance, XBRL still caters for you. It still gives you solutions you can use. And the guidance itself will tell you the type of things you might run into should you go with one of these approaches, what characteristics and what consequences arise from choosing them. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, we have some questions from the public. So the first one, I think some of them we cannot answer those, but let's try it. Can tech validation taxonomies be made the way that different taxonomies do not affect each other?
So the question is,
I think it's on the validations of what happened with the validation when you have different validations from different taxonomies and how can be this handled, I think is the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So each whichever of these approaches you take, you've always got the basic taxonomy there. Right? And so you're always going to be able to apply that separately. That's the same for all of them. As far as I'm aware. Where it becomes more interesting is when you want to validate across taxonomies, so from one taxonomy to another. Now, in order to do that, you actually need to bring them together with one of these unifying taxonomies. It's something that we actually we perhaps might consider adding to the guidance, that when you want to validate between taxonomies, you have to create some kind of unifying taxonomy that understands both of them. Otherwise, that's not possible. But yeah, single taxonomies generally unaffected by any of these routes.
Mm-hmm. The second one is there planning to have interoperability between two taxonomies or possible mapping across taxonomies is possible?
Mm.
I think this is something maybe that should be answered by the authorities, right? I don't know, Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's kind of perhaps a slightly different issue there with when you have two taxonomies that are quite different or that are covering exactly the same thing but wouldn't necessarily appear in the same report. But yeah, mapping. I think most of the thinking that we've done around this that can be applied to that is that doing things at when you're defining the data, makes everything a lot cheaper and easier and efficient and correct and good quality than leaving it for people to do at the end. And so I know that there's some efforts to kind of standardize the descriptions about how one item in one taxonomy might map to another item in another taxonomy. And these are good things to do, I think. But there's nothing specifically in this guidance covering
them. I think maybe this touched the overlapping of the data, maybe. But I also think that this is something that should be handled by the data by the authorities, basically, and guidance, giving the guidance how's this to be managed, I guess.
Yeah.
And the very last one is a question regarding the multiple taxonomies. No, I'm not sorry. Question regarding a unified extension for multiple taxonomies. How anchors for multiple taxonomies have been managed?
Now, this is probably quite a technical question.
Yes, I
I
think
have
so.
not tried it
Of course.
myself, but it's my understanding that anchors sit within an extension taxonomy, effectively. So so when you're adding your own anchors, at least, you're creating an extension taxonomy. And again, this is an area where you're going to want to just have a unified extension with everything in, because effectively a unified extension looks, to all intents and purposes, that you have one taxonomy, it just happens to have everything in it. And so anything that you can do with a single taxonomy, well, you can do with lots of taxonomies that have all been brought together. And I don't see any reason why anchors couldn't be added by the data collector or the person creating that taxonomy either, to make sure that there were links, explicitly links between the taxonomy. So really good question. I think it'd be interesting to see if people use that kind of approach when they're creating their unifying extension. Yeah.
Thank you. That's it. Do you have any other questions? We have 1 minute left. If something else coming up, let me see. Yeah, we have one more. I think it's not a question. So it says, it's not a question, but I think this double as long as the technical attribute is consistent and rules are followed by different standard setters. I think, that's a comment. Okay. So thank you very much, Ben, and also you, audience, for being with us and asking questions. And have a nice day today, and see you soon at the next webinar directions. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.